Okay, Shayne, please introduce yourself and take it away.
Sure. So, and let me know if you can't hear me. So my name is Shayne Piasta. I'm an associate faculty member in teaching and learning, and I'm also an associate faculty member at the Crane Center for Early Childhood Research and Policy. And Kim asked me to talk a little bit about and describe the different funding opportunities that are available from IES, or the Institute of Education Sciences, which, if you're not familiar with this is the educational grant funding mechanism through the U.S. Department of Education. So I'm sure that these slides will be available, so you'll have the link. But I started off with giving you the link to finding the funding proposals or RFPs that are available from IES. And really what IES is aimed at is funding research that is contributing to improved academic achievement for students. So this is really when you're looking at student outcomes. The way that IES organizes itself is it organizes its funding opportunities by program and then by topic, and within that sometimes also by goal, which I'll describe in a little bit. So I just thought I'd start by sharing the different programs that are offered through IES. So one program really actually focuses on research training. So there are pathways grants to get students into high quality educational research training programs. There are training programs or grant funding for training predoctoral students as well as postdoctoral students. And then there are also training programs to kind of hone your skills if you're already in the field through early career awards and also methods awards. The second program that IES offers is Statistical and Research Methodology in Education. So this is focused on improving methodology within educational research. A third program that's offered is Partnerships and Collaborations focused on problems of practice or policy. And there are a number of different specific topics under here, but the main focus of this grant is that you would be working in conjunction with practitioners, that you have a standing MOU with either a district or a state Department of Education, where you are working together to do research on a problem that is of interest to that group and that they will then take action on based on the research results. IES also has research and development centers. So these are large grants that fund an entire center devoted to providing answers to questions on a particular topic. These are invited only every so often. They're actually not up for renewal right now. IES has also started funding a program of research networks. There are 3 now. None of these are currently available for proposals, but the idea is seeing how these 3 particular networks go, they may invite more networks to be proposed. And the idea of the research network is that they actually invite proposals from multiple universities. They typically have funded up to 5, and then the goal is for all of those teams to work both individually and collaboratively on the same topic to solve a particular problem. They've also started offering low-cost, short duration evaluation of interventions. These are very, very quick. They're meant to be a year, I believe 2 years at most in duration, and mostly capitalize on already existing data and almost already existing designs. So you don't have quite the funding you would need to run an RCT or run a regression discontinuity design from scratch, but if you have a natural experiment that's already been set up where there's a cut point or something to do a regression discontinuity, or a natural experiment set up for you to evaluate an intervention in a way that meets the What Worked Clearinghouse guidelines for methodology, then this would be a good mechanism to do that. IES also has an other and unsolicited program that I don't think most folks know about. This is off-cycle. So these are actually typically due in March, whereas the other grants have been due in the summer. And so you can propose whatever you would like to propose. They typically only fund less than 5, however. But there is a mechanism for that. And then, of course, the biggest program for grants that IES has is their educational and special education research. So under this program, they are interested in funding work that will identify, develop, and validate effective education programs. And they define programs very broadly. So program could be an intervention, it could be a curriculum, it could be a series of professional development. That term is used very, very broadly. All of these have to be focused on student outcomes. So for preschool aged children, that is elements of school readiness. For K to 12 students, that is core academic outcomes, plus behaviors and social skills that support successful school learning and transitions. For adults, that is post-secondary enrollment and completion of post-secondary programs, adult basic skills, and then an additional outcome of importance for IES for children with disabilities are functional outcomes. So you must be focused on improving one of these or an aspect of these in order to be eligible for IES funding. Within the education and special education research program, the funding mechanisms are organized by both topic and then also goal. So each topic, which I'll show you the list in a moment, again, this is meant to be kind of a very broad overview, so I'm not going to go into detail about them, but you can look up more information if it seems to fit with your own work. But under each topic, every year IES identifies specific gaps within that area, and that's really what you want to make sure that you're targeting if at all possible. Each topic also has very specific requirements in terms of who can be in your sample, what outcomes you need to be focused on, in the setting in which the research must take place. The goal then actually guides your research questions and your design, and I'll show you that in a moment. Okay, so here is the big list. NCER is educational research program topics, and NCSER are the special education research topics. As you can see, there are a broad array. You would apply to only one topic, and you have to actually pick one topic and say what that topic is in your application. So if you could fit under a couple, I recommend talking to the program officer and trying to figure out where it is your fit would be best. In terms of goals, it's meant to be a progression. So remember I said that IES is interested in identifying, developing, and validating. So goal 1 is meant to identify potentially effective programs or potentially malleable factors within education. Goal 2 is meant to develop that program, whatever it may be. Goal 3 is meant to validate that as an efficacy trial. Goal 4 is meant to validate it as a scale-up study. And then you kind of have your outlier of goal 5, which is measurement work that's relevant to being able to target the different outcomes in the different programs and topics. So I'll just briefly go over each of these goals. So as I said, goal 1 is exploration, and the intent here is to identify potentially malleable factors that could be associated with positive student education outcomes. It's meant to help you build theory, but also, and very importantly, it also must help you either develop an intervention or practice, or help you develop an effective assessment. It can involve either primary or secondary data analysis, and the time duration and the amount of money that's awarded depend on whether it is primary or secondary data. So primary data, you get more money, you get more time. Goal 2 then is meant to take what we know about these potentially malleable factors and use that information along with theory to build potentially effective educational programs. Again, the use of intervention here is really meant to be broad. Again, it has to be designed to impact student outcomes, and it also has to be designed to be used in authentic education contexts. So for preschool, that means center-based preschools. It means K through 12 settings, classrooms. or post-secondary classrooms. You have to use an iterative development process to develop your intervention. You have to end with a fully developed intervention, whatever that may be. You have to have data that shows usability, feasibility, fidelity of implementation by the intended end user, so you cannot simply be testing this out in your lab. And you also must end with pilot data that shows the promise of positive impacts on student outcomes. And those have to be those educational outcomes that I mentioned on one of the earlier slides. These are up to 4 years in duration and a total of $1.4 million. Goal 3 is efficacy and replication. So building on the Goal 2 work, although you don't have to have had a Goal 1 or a Goal 2 to get a Goal 3, but you have this potentially effective intervention or program that you've developed or someone has developed. You now want to evaluate that fully developed intervention in authentic educational contexts under ideal or close to routine conditions. And again, you need to evaluate that with respect to impact on student education outcomes. So for a Goal 3, you have to use a design that yields causally interpretable information, i.e. those that meet the What Works Clearinghouse standards. You have to document fidelity of implementation. Again, you should be doing this with the intended end users. So if you're in classrooms, this would be teachers actually using it. And you actually also have to include a cost analysis in with this particular proposal. You should also talk about how this efficacy study and collecting that fidelity of implementation data can further refine your theory of change or the theory of how the program should work. And there are actually 4 types of studies that are funded under this mechanism. So there's a straight efficacy trial, there's a replication trial, so you could try to replicate results that others have found. This is actually a new push within IES. There is an efficacy follow-up, so if you see as you're doing your efficacy trial that you have good evidence of children making progress, you could quickly try to turn that around and get some follow-up time to follow those kids longitudinally. And you can also propose a retrospective study if there is existing data and a naturally occurring design or data that lends itself to one of the What Works Clearinghouse designs for causally interpretable evidence. These range in duration and total costs, again, depending on which of those 4 types of studies that you're doing. And I should mention, I forgot to mention earlier, that IES uses total costs as opposed to direct costs. So when you see those totals, that is the maximum for both your direct and your indirect costs. Goal 4 is effectiveness. So effectiveness, you have to have had at least 1 prior efficacy study with positive results, and then you can go after an effectiveness trial, which would essentially be a scale up. So this is supposed to be an independent evaluation of that fully developed educational intervention to see its impact on student outcomes when implemented by the end user under completely routine conditions and authentic contexts. So you cannot, if you develop the intervention, you can actually not be the investigator for a Goal 4. It has to be independent. It does have to use a design that meets the What Works Clearinghouse standards, and you have to continue to document fidelity, but you're supposed to provide very little support other than what teachers or other educational professionals would be receiving when trying to implement this particular program on their own. Again, there are 2 types. There's an effectiveness and then there's an effectiveness follow-up. I don't know of anybody who has ever received an effectiveness follow-up. I don't know that IES has ever granted one yet. But again, the idea is if you're seeing positive results, you might want to follow those kids longitudinally. And again, the amount of funding and duration depends on study type. The final goal then is a Goal 5. This is measurement, so it's to support the development of new assessments or refine assessments or validate existing assessments that align with the topics and outcomes that IES is interested in, okay? Again, you have to use an iterative development or refinement process. You have to end with a fully developed measurement tool. You have to also include a very well-specified assessment framework that includes both validation activities as well as other activities to develop psychometrics. And these are generally 4 years and up to $1.4 million in total costs. So those are the different programs and the topics and goals. Just briefly wanted to review what would be in an application to IES then. So of course you have all of your forms, you have your budget and your budget justification that the Office of Research provides a lot of support in doing and completing. You have your project abstract. You then have a 25-page single-spaced project narrative. This includes your significance section, your research plan, a personnel section, and then a resources section, which now must also include a dissemination plan. So how are you going to get the information you learned from the research out to different stakeholders? You're allowed to have a number of different appendices. So one can be, if it's a revision to a proposal, you can provide a response to the previous reviewers. There is Appendix B, which allows you to have supplementary material and figures, charts, tables, examples of measures. Appendix C is actually to provide example of intervention or assessment materials. Appendix D are letters of support from the end users that you are hoping to work with, and you must have these. This is actually, I've seen reviews just completely tank because it's not clear that the person actually has partners who can do the work with them. And then the last appendix is your data management plan, which is required for goals 3 and 4 only. You get to include your references, you have a human subjects narrative, and then finally your bio sketches for your key personnel. And then just very, very briefly, I'll end with the review process. So IES has a number of standing panels. They'll convene ad hoc panels as necessary. But all panels are based on the program to which you're applying. And then if you're in the education and special education, it's also based on the topic. All of the panels include both content experts as well as methodologists. The review process is that your proposal initially is assigned to 2 or 3 primary reviewers. They go through, read the full thing, identify strengths and weaknesses, and provide an initial score. If you score high enough, you will make it to the full panel review. If not, your triage. It's very similar to the NIH process. The scoring then is based on, for each of those 4 aspects I mentioned, so significance, research plan, personnel, and resources, it's a score of 7 to 1, with higher scores being better, and a score in each of those 4 areas. And then you also get assigned an overall score, which is actually reversed. So a score of 1, which is outstanding, to a score of 5, which is poor. Things that I've seen funded are generally scoring at least 2 and below, if not lately 1.5 and below. The budget, the data management plan, and human subject narratives are all actually reviewed by the review panel, but they are not considered during the scoring. Although what I will say is that there is conversation and they're told not to include it in scoring, but sometimes that is kind of in the back of people's minds and can come into play. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the next speaker.